the most pure and simple of all the modulation effects. In my opinion, tremolo is one of the most timeless and least cheesy of all the modulation effects. There's so many great sounds in simple 3-knob tremolo pedals like this Boss TR-2. I'm going to go through how to make it sound like a tube bias tremolo, an optical tremolo, why you might choose one over the other, and I'll also cover some more modern non-vintage tremolo sounds as well. There are tremolo pedals with a lot more features than this, but let's see how far we can push the little old TR-2. Tube bias tremolo is a type of circuit that changes the bias of the tubes in the amp to create the tremolo effect. It's used in amps like the Fender Blackface Princeton Reverb and this Silverface Pro Reverb. The sound is really quite smooth and gentle on a tube bias type tremolo, and in my experience the range of speeds is a little slower as well. To get a tube bias tremolo type sound out of the TR-2, I've set the waveform almost all the way to the sawtooth setting, so you know there's a lot of movement in that waveform. It sounds quite smooth. I'll compare it to the real tube bias tremolo on the Pro Reverb and see how close you think it gets. Personally, I like the gentler nature of the tube bias tremolo sound for things like adding subtle movement to clean sounds. So think of things like the arpeggiated chord part to Creep by Radiohead, where I think the depth is set quite low and the sound is subtle, but without it, the part would sound kind of pretty plain and a little bit boring, I think. So it just adds that little bit of movement. That's good for when you're playing long notes that are ringing out. If you're playing something with shorter notes like the intro to Gimme Shelter by the Rolling Stones, you can afford to put the rate and depth controls up a little bit, I think, to stop the effect from sounding too transparent or getting lost or anything. The sounds don't have to be clean, it just seems to suit parts where you might want a smoother, gentler movement to the sound instead of the dramatic pulsing that some other types of tremolo can have. Moody, sustained chords with a bit of drive I think work well. I'll play a bit of Blow Up the Outside World by Soundgarden and see what you think. So that's tube bias tremolo. Now let's look at optical tremolo. So optical tremolo doesn't use power valves in the amp or anything. It uses a circuit that has a bulb and a light dependent resistor. And not all optical tremolos sound the same either. The type of sound you get is dependent on the type of bulb you use and things like that. But I think one of the most famous types of optical tremolo is the one found in some of the Fender Blackface amps like the Fender Deluxe Reverb and the Twin Reverb, where it's quite a choppy sound, it's quite an abrupt change in the volume, and it has a nice sort of throbbing sound to it. To get this sound from the TR-2, set the wave control just lean into the more square wave setting. I'll compare it to the tremolo on my Deluxe Reverb, see if you can hear the similarity in the sound. For me, the more dynamic and choppier sound of the optical tremolos best suit styles like rock and surf guitar, where you want a more obvious tremolo sound, you know, it's more dramatic. find that optical tremolos often have a faster speed range than tube bias tremolos. So if you hear a fast flickering type tremolo, especially on an old recording, then it's, I think, pretty likely that it might be an optical tremolo. Think of sounds like Money by Pink Floyd or Rumble by Link Wray. I think those are pretty good examples of this fast optical tremolo sound that I'm talking about. For more modern tremolo sounds, try setting the waveform all the way to the square wave setting. So it'll just be an ultra choppy on-off sound now. There's no ramping up or ramping down of the volume. The sound is just going on and then off again. Think of songs like Boulevard of Broken Dreams by Green Day, or another one is What's the Frequency Kenneth by R.E.M. That has a guitar part in there that uses this sort of sound. It's quite a synth-like sound, and you can make it even more dramatic by putting your reverbs and delays and time-based effects before the tremolo, so that you don't get any kind of reverb tail or anything after that shutting off of the signal that the tremolo is doing. So it's just a nice way to make it even more dramatic. The other thing that the TR-2 can do that most traditional amp tremolos can't is extreme speeds. So you can go faster and slower with the TR-2 than most traditional amp tremolos. So you can get really fast fluttering type effects with the rate set all the way up, or you can get really slow, subtle swells to the volume with the rate set low. The other way you might want to try using tremolos is a momentary effect. So amp tremolos take a few moments to kick in, so they're not so good at doing this, but a pedal tremolo like the TR-2, the effect kicks in instantly and on the beat that you press the pedal as well, which is useful. So if you set it to the waveform of square wave and use it as a momentary effect, it's got a really similar sound to a kill switch type effect. I almost forgot to mention, on some of the older TR2s there is a slightly perceived volume drop when the effect is on. It's not something that bothers me too much, but if you're using the effect as a momentary effect a lot, or just switching it on and off a lot for different sections in a song or something like that, it might be something that bugs you a bit. So I've put a link in the description to a mod kit that fits an internal trim pot to the TR2, so you can set the overall volume of the effect. On the newer versions of the TR2, apparently there's already a trim pot in there on the circuit board. So all you have to do with those is open it up, and somewhere on the circuit board there should be a trim pot for you to adjust the overall volume. So it shouldn't be a problem with the new TR2s.